Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all online. Um, my name is Koen Snoeks. I have my own company, LUSCINUS, and since a few years I call myself collision maker. And hopefully through this webinar, it will become clear what I mean with that. First of all, allow me to thank the organization for giving me this opportunity, this stage. I feel very honored to be able to speak to you. And I hope that what I'm about to tell you will give you some practical insights to be used in your daily practice. And while I hope you will feel my enthusiasm for what I'm about to tell you, in no means I want to create the impression that this is the almighty truth and that you should disregard or disqualify everything you have been doing so far or are doing. And that's also why I slightly changed the title, as some of you might have seen. And where in the original title it said, instead of incremental innovation, I changed it into in parallel to the ones for incremental innovation, because I think what I'm going to explain you might be a useful tool to add to the portfolio of instruments and policies that you already and activities that you already have in place. And so it's going to be about creative community colliders. What is that? Why do we need them? And how can you start building them yourself if you would like to? And it's about atmosphere for fundamental change. And to get started, I want to tell you a little story about fundamental change. If I can go to the next slide, yes. And a few years I had the opportunity to meet this person. It's David Marin Roma. He's from Guatemala. He's an artist, also has a PhD in theoretical physics. And I met him a few years ago during a residency program when he was staying for a few weeks in the Netherlands. And David is a very talkative person, very interesting person, has an opinion about almost everything. So we had a lot of chats and discussions, and in one of those, he told me, Koen, do you realize that in Europe, your biggest problem is the Roman calendar? And I was surprised, said, okay, the Roman calendar, why? He said, well, I observe you, and you have such a busy lives, and if you don't have a depression yet or a burnout, then you probably almost have one. And it's because you try to squeeze everything into a 7-day cycle. You try to be a professional expert, you try to be a good father, you try to be a good friend, and so forth. And it's just impossible to squeeze everything into that week. And then you start realizing that. And then what you do is follow yoga classes, buy books for time management or mindfulness. And that still doesn't solve the problem. And he said, well, he said, my solution is switch to the Mayan calendar. And I'm now going to give the very simplified version, because David, he really knew the Mayan culture. He had lived with the Mayans and absorbed their knowledge. And my simplified version is that the Mayan calendar is a 20-day cycle. So on day 1, you can focus on your work. On day 2, you can focus on your friends. On day 3, you can focus on the environment. On day 4, you can focus on your family, and so on. And for me, it's even hard to name 20 things to focus on in each day. So it became clear that, okay, yes, this might indeed be a much more fundamental direction to go into and to solve this time issues that we sometimes experience here in Europe. And it's not about this particular topic about changing the Roman calendar or not. And whereas I'm quite convinced that if we would want to, we would be capable of doing that, because there was a time before that as well. But it's about really understanding that what is fundamental and how can we think beyond the solutions and instruments that are maybe easily available. And so that was for me the first time that I really thoroughly understood what that meant. And how can we repeat this? How can we create these insights that a person like David gave me? And a few years ago, in 2016, this report was published by Nesta. And one of the conclusions was that if we're capable of combining the scientific methodologies that a lot of us have embedded in our companies and organizations that are well documented, that give clear outcomes, that you can hire external expertise for, if we're capable of combining these scientific methodologies with more creative and artistic methodologies and embed those as well in our organizations, then you have a very high chance of coming up with radically new ideas. Now, the thing with these artistic and creative methodologies is that they're maybe less well documented, that they are not that easily available to hire external services for, and so forth. They might be less straightforward in the outcomes that they promise to you. But anyhow, this I think is the direction to go. Now, how do you do that, combining these two methodologies? And to get these fundamental new ideas. And that's what at some point me and my colleagues brought to making the analogy with the world of physics and astrology. And in the world of physics and astrology, if researchers want to get fundamental insights, they've built a laboratory for that, and it's called the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, CERN. I hope a lot of you know what it is. It's a big tube underground in which it's a circular tube in which subatomic particles fly around. And basically what happens there happens everywhere in the universe. It's subatomic particles flying around and then bumping into each other at some point. And it's when they collide that interesting things happen, because then energy is generated and fundamental new insights surface. And then you can really investigate things like the origin of the universe and black holes. And it made us think like, okay, can we create an analogy to the society that we live in? And if we look around in our ecosystem, in our local regions, we all have people in academia, we have people in industry, we have people in the event and entertainment business, we have people in the cultural creative industries, we have people in policy making. And same as with these subatomic particles, they're all moving about at their own speed and a lot of the time next to each other. And the same as in the universe, these collisions happen from time to time. People from these different disciplines and sectors, they meet, they bump into each other. From time to time, positive energy is generated through these collisions, and maybe even useful new insights. And the only thing is, same with the Large Hadron Collider, in the universe, these things happen at a certain occasion. But by building a laboratory, you have a number of advantages. And the first one is you can increase the chance of these collisions happening. The second one is that you can, if they happen, you can observe them, you can learn from them, you can document them, and you can maybe transfer the knowledge to create more collisions and more insights. So that's a little bit where our terminology of creative community colliders came from, and what it means, and also why we need them. Now, to make it a little bit more concrete, I'm gonna walk you through some concrete examples and projects that I've experienced in the past years in my own professional life, and based on that, give you some more insights in what a creative community collider could then eventually be. And this is my first example, and this is something that happened out there in the universe. So it's not that for this case, for this project, someone had created a community collider. It was just out there. And we were very lucky to have found this example and observed it. And this is a project by Saska and his friends. And Saska and his wife and 2 or 3 friends, they have an artist collective in Bandung, in Indonesia, and it's a very busy city. And public transport, well, transport as a whole in Bandung, it's chaotic. And public transport is arranged through these private taxis. And at some point, Saska and his friends, they decided, okay, let's look into this problem. in a bit more fundamental way than what would be obvious. Because the obvious solution for public transport would be to look at the infrastructure. For example, there are no road signs, there are no bus stops. So a logical way would be to look at that. But Saskia and his friends looked somewhat deeper. So again, through his artistic insights and practice, he went beyond the obvious. And he started observing the people inside these angkot and realized that the biggest problem was in the attitude towards this angkot was generated by 2 moments of frustration. And what they did as a solution is they, for one day, they paid the angkot drivers their average daily wage in their district. They paid it upfront in the morning. They just said like, okay, here is your salary. Now you just do your job. And it removed 2 frictions. First one was when passengers entered the angkot. Then immediately the angkot drivers started to drive, whereas previously they had to wait for more passengers to step in to make their business viable. And so that friction was taken away. Then when passengers stepped out, another moment of friction was taken away because they didn't have to negotiate a fare anymore because everything was paid up front. So rather than frustration and discussions, you got a little bit of a surprise, of course. People were very surprised, but then they started smiling. So through this very simple intervention, in one day in this district, they recreated the perception of public transport without intervening in the physical infrastructure. So that's one of the examples that's out there and made us realize like, okay, what if we can find these people and put them in our collider, put them in our laboratory? And then you can do a number of things. And in this particular project, which was initiated by Baltan Laboratories, a cultural organization in the Netherlands, HIVOS, an NGO, and the Dutch Design Foundation in Eindhoven. And they started to invite people like Saskia for residencies in Europe. And they said like, okay, they got selected internationally for their previous portfolio and successes in social change. And they were invited to the Netherlands as experts. And they brought along their own projects, but mostly we made them collide with people randomly, people and organizations randomly, partly curated, and then just watched what happened and how with their insights they could create impact in our local environment. And I'm not going through all the impact and the stories. They're all quite well documented online. And as also in the upcoming examples, as you can see, I've left hyperlinks for you for your future reference that you can browse through them more deeply after the webinar. So this is one example. It was a 4-year exchange program. As part of this exchange program, at some point, we organized, or Baltan Laboratories organized a hackathon. And there again, brought together some of these people from the Age of Wonderland program, but also others. And in this specific hackathon, again, the story is online, very well documented. A CEO from a small enterprise in the Netherlands, he got completely surprised by what the creatives made for him. And it made him 1.5 years after the hackathon, it made him completely transform his business. So rather than moving forward as a traditional business, offering solutions to new and known markets, he is now decentralizing his business based on open source philosophy and cryptocurrencies. So this was just by this hackathon with some artistic and creative people involved that he got the unexpected. Another example is this one, where in the framework of Cultural Capital 2002 in Turnhout in Belgium, intermediate organization called Art Economy, they had the opportunity to link 5 times one company to one artist. And again, with no specific end result in mind before they started. And in this was one of 5 projects. In this case, Peter de Kuppere, a scent artist, was linked to Cartamundi, world leader in card games and playing cards. And thanks to this artistic project, which had no commercial intentions whatsoever from the start, thanks to this project, Carta Mundi was capable of selling the technology that's behind this project to a number of very renowned customers. Whereas before the project happened, they had been trying to sell this technology, but they were incapable because they were using it mostly because of the technological specifications. And now that it was presented to them through an artistic project, it got much more appeal and also economic traction. Again, it's very well documented online. So if you want to know more, I encourage you to read through the documentation. Another example is this one where we, in Eindhoven and in a European dimension with 6 cities so far across Europe, have created an ecosystem, if you want, a consortium of ecosystems called Creative Ring, in which we try to manufacture these collisions through events, to all kinds of support programs. And this is just one example where Jessica Smarch, a conceptual designer, graduate from Design Academy in Eindhoven, at one of the events that Creative Ring organized, got in touch with Raymond van E, who is a neuroscientist at Philips Research and the Leuven University. And thanks to this very simple collision, this encounter, it completely transformed Jessica's life and business. She went from being a conceptual designer to an entrepreneur. And this only thanks to, or starting by this one simple encounter with a person that she would normally not easily have met. And then this is an example I've been less involved in, but in view of the context and I think your background as policymakers and maybe urban developers, if you want, I want to give you this example anyway in a bit more depth. This is Woensel West. It's one of the areas in Eindhoven. It's a problematic area, or at least it used to be, to the extent even that in 2007, it ended up in a national list of 40, so 40 problematic areas all across the Netherlands. And this is not a nice list to be on as an area. But the advantage of being on that list was that a lot of investment and funding was made available to improve these 40 problematic districts. And obviously, thanks to this budget, a lot of infrastructure was improved and a lot of investments were made. Like, for example, in the bottom right, you see a picture of the new development projects by the social housing company Trudeau, and they at least make it more appealing and more colorful, which no doubt helps a great lot. But the real breakthrough, again, came through people. And in 2009, Trudeau decided, together with some others, to create what they called an emancipation program. And the link to the PDF, it's in Dutch, is there on the slide, so you can browse through it. Hopefully Google Translate can help you translate it to your own language. And one of the main instruments of this emancipation program was quite a simple instrument. They said, if you want to rent a house in Woensel West, and if you're willing to invest some of your time and expertise in the area, then we give you a reduction on your rental price. And this was a very interesting instrument because it attracted a lot of young creative people that just graduated from the Design Academy or from the product industrial design at the university. And these creatives, they had a lot of trouble finding a decent income and also having the budget for decent living. So this reduction in rental price was very appealing to them. So it really worked. And to give you an idea, for every 100 people that you are capable of acquiring in this program and spend 10 hours a month on educational activities, cultural activities, social activities, sports, then you, for every 100 people that you manage to get into this program, you create the equivalent of an 8-person company. So you have 8 full-time equivalent to your disposition to do valuable things in this neighborhood. And the report of which the link is below, gives you a lot of details. But for me, one of the most striking examples of the impact that it got created was about the primary school. And the primary school in this area was labeled as very weak. And in only 4 years time, partly or greatly thanks to this emancipation program, it went from very weak to the best in the region. So not just improved, it really became top in class. And I think this is a prime example of how there was a stage like, okay, we're gonna bring people together and it's gonna improve things. But we don't know how and where and at what time. So I think this is a very good example of how a relatively simple instrument, a reduction on rental price, got some very diverse and high impact outcomes. So to summarize briefly, what can creative community colliders be? For me, they can be a lot of things. They can be an event or a series of events. They can be an organization, cluster, or consortium, physical space, a residency program, policy instrument, whatever you can think about. But mostly for me, they're also a mindset. And obviously this list might be very abstract and difficult for you, but it shows that what I'm explaining you, there's no one size fits all solution. So it's all dependent on your local context, which of these instruments could work best and which not. So what are then some of the ingredients that are behind this mindset, if you want, and that you could use as an underlying philosophy under each of these instruments? And for me, one of the most important ones is start with what unites people. Because a lot of the time when we talk about creative ecosystems and collisions, we talk about disciplines. We talk about engineers, civil servants, citizens, designers, artists, educators. And I think it's more interesting to talk about what unites us. And this is a book that was given to me 2 years ago by Alto Design Factory. And ever since, it's my #1 recommendation to everyone to read this book. And if you don't want to read all the book, at least the first chapter where they define passion-based co-creation. I think it really well defines, like, start with passion, and it's in all of these sectors. You can find people with an intrinsic motivation to improve things. So that's one of the key ingredients, I think. Also, secondly, create a level playing field. And this is also easier said than done. But this is an example from Baltan Laboratories, where I worked for a few years. And in the legal contracts of Baltan Laboratories, which were just one-page contracts, there were some paragraphs on how long we would collaborate together with partners and what we would collaborate on. But mostly there was like, okay, if we're going to start collaborating, it will be based on these core values. And they seem like very soft values, but I think I increasingly feel that they're very important in future collaboration, and also in the context of creative community colliders, that there's a certain equality and reciprocity, and that it's not because you create the stage that you also have to be on the stage, or if you create an initiative, that you have to be the one that harvests the most value out of this initiative. So I think these are some aspects to take into account. Thirdly, meet in the middle. Here, at least when I look around in my own professional network and context, I see a lot of initiatives where people reach out to other sectors. And Eindhoven is where I work a lot, is an environment of technology and design. But if your local context is about agriculture and immaterial heritage, then you have these silos, you have these clusters and actors in these main sectors in your area. And then from time to time, at least what I see, they reach out to the other sectors. Educators reach out to industry, government reaches out to citizens, and so forth. And then for me, you are more or less in the constellation which is on the right. So you have these silos, these specialisms, and you reach out to others. And from this study, which is in the context of social change, and I just extrapolate this to the context we're in for complex solutions or complex challenges, societal challenges. In this study, it says that this configuration for the dissemination and the acceptance of complex ideas, the middle configuration is the best. And there you see that you should not remove the silos, not at all. You should clearly still be able to make a distinction between fields of expertise, but that in the middle, you should create more connections. And what I want to advocate is create these connections together. Don't reach out unilaterally to the others, but reach out to all of the important stakeholders in your ecosystem and meet in the middle, create these connections in the middle together. So that's another one. Then going back to Wunsel, a fourth ingredient is set an agenda. It's okay. Sometimes you can leave things just out in the open and observe and be surprised. If you want to set an agenda, it's definitely not a bad thing. Here in Wunsel West, the agenda was social improvement of the area. But be careful. Don't set your agenda to the level that you want predefined outcomes. If they would have said, now we want people in this area who are going to bring the local primary school from very weak to best in class, I would be surprised if the same impact would have been generated. So it's by setting the agenda on the right level and leaving room for organic solutions and unexpected encounters. It's then that the real fundamental things happen. So set an agenda, but not too tight. And in the case of SNOECKX, be patient in this case. So it was 1.5 years after the collision that the people involved truly understood the impact. So, and then finally, I'm not sure if you know what's happening in this picture. And to be honest, neither do I. I don't know what these people are talking about. But my gut feeling says that it's valuable. I can see them smiling. I can see they're engaged. I can see they're motivated. And that would be my final key ingredient for the moment is trust your gut feeling and dare to step away from quantitative parameters to measure the impact and the results of your initiatives. Because clearly, if you look at this in a more qualitative way and following your gut feeling, I would judge this discussion, this encounter as a very positive one. So second part of my conclusions, some key ingredients. If you want to build one or more of these creative community colliders, take these ingredients into account. Start from what unites you, not what differentiates you. Create a level playing field, meet in the middle, and also appreciate mediators. As might have become clear in this project, with art economy, they were in the middle. They were mediating between the artist and the company. Creative Ring is a number of people that understand the language of all the stakeholders around the table. You have people with crazy function titles like Collision Maker that might have an expertise to mediate between sectors. So I think don't underestimate the role of these people and organizations. Set the agenda, but not predefined outcomes. Be patient and persist, and dare to measure in terms of energy that's created and not necessarily by direct return on investment. So that's, then you have some instruments, you have some ingredients, but now how can you get started tomorrow if you would like? And then I get back to your local context. And I think there's no one size fits all solution, as I said. And it's about really thoroughly looking at what's there in your cultural and creative industries already in your ecosystem. And this is a grid which I made up a few years ago, and I think could be useful in this context. And it has two axes. And the more you go to the bottom, the more you arrive in this area of collisions. Here you have the unexpected. the more you move upwards, you are solution oriented. So the more you move upwards, you have a very specific question asking for a very specific answer. And in the bottom, on the horizontal axis, the more you go to the left, the more low threshold it is. So this is easy access. And the more you go to the right, the higher the threshold. And I would suggest look around you. Who are your important stakeholders in your ecosystem? As I said, in Eindhoven, where I work a lot, it's design and technology. In your area, it might be heritage and tourism or fashion and tourism. So look around you. Who are these stakeholders? And then try to assess, do they already meet? And do they only meet within their own specialism? Or can you create other events where they can meet each other? And if not, just start there. That's something we've done over the past 5 to 10 years. Just organize events and then just start doing it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Just hire a microphone, bring in some drinks, and people will show up. Again, there in these events, be careful with the agenda, with setting your agenda to these events. Just leave the agenda open or make the agenda of your visitors. And then you will see that things will happen. And if people start to meet, they will start to create energy, enthusiasm, inspiration. And quite soon, if you observe it, then you will see that a need will emerge to move upwards to more solution-oriented activities, or to move more into the right, to more high-threshold activities like co-creation and really tackling complex problems. So this is one, and would be out of scope to go more in depth on this grid and all the elements. But this is one advice that I could give you is look at your local ecosystem, try to see what's there, and there's always something there. On the other side, looking at your actors, or talking now to the actors in the cultural and creative industries, this could also be a way to position yourself towards other sectors. Because as I understood, Chebec is about hacking the Mediterranean economy through cultural and creative industries. And also in the first webinar, there was a lot of explanation about the impact that cultural and creative industries can have on other sectors. So this is also what at least I've been doing with the organizations that I've been involved in CCI, is map our services in this grid and make it insightful towards the other sectors, what you can bring. If my organization gives you low threshold access to inspiration, then that's what I have to offer you. And then I don't want to raise the expectation that I'm going to give you a point solution. So that's, I feel, a very useful tool for any kind of cultural organization to see, like, okay, what do I do? What are my activities? How do I communicate them now to the outside world? And how can I maybe redefine them just by explaining them differently, not by necessarily altering what I'm doing, but by positioning them differently and explaining them more, that it becomes understandable for my external partners what they can get out of it. So that's one instrument that I wanted to briefly touch upon. Secondly, I think, what is your role as a municipality? And this is a question that I often hear. And here I want to refer to an exercise that was done in Espoo in Finland. It's one of the happiest and most sustainable cities in the world. So I suppose they know what they're talking about. And not so long ago, they made an exercise. What should be the role of the municipality in a city and in an innovation ecosystem? And the answer was to remove frictions. And they've summarized it in a video, and it's a 2.5 minute video, and that's something I want to show to you, and will also almost conclude the webinar before we can move into the questions and answers. So just sit back and enjoy the movie.
The Frictionless City: Dynamics of Innovation Ecosystems. Often, we see distance from others as prohibitively inconvenient, leading us to stick with the old and familiar. Even when we are struck with inspiration, that inspiration remains trapped, with little way of coming to fruition within the communities of like-minded people in which we work. and often we're unaware of possibilities that may reside outside the box. However, when strangers meet, fortunate coincidences can occur. City government can actively enable such encounters, for instance, by arranging events and creating physical, social, and digital spaces. This allows all sorts of people to interact and share ideas, create new knowledge, and get motivated to act on ideas. Such enabling services are affordances that the city government can use to direct innovative energy in pursuit of societal goals. In other words, the government would invest in such things as co-working tools, workshop facilitation methods, hackathon events, orchestration services, and digital knowledge refinement applications in order to guide activities towards common goals. They form innovation platforms in which knowledge about innovative ideas are held, fostered, and made available for collaboration. Collaboration that is based on mutual commitment to common goals is the best practice of innovation ecosystems. Smooth interaction, openness, transparency, trust, and confidence are prerequisites for successful co-creation. The city government's role would be to remove friction that prevents success. The city government's active enabling role helps create new knowledge and new markets. Developing innovation platforms and transforming innovations into sustainable 21st century urban services brings business opportunities and value to citizens and enterprises. In a city without friction, anything is possible.
Okay, so this is my final or third part of my conclusion. How do you get started as a policymaker? Understand your local context. Try to walk before you are going to try to run. Observe and remove frictions. And then, in my own words, embrace collisions, because to my feeling, the unexpected always beats the obvious. So I think this concludes my part of the webinar presenting to you. I might have gone really fast, I understand. This might be a first bite of what is a complete meal, but I hope I've given you at least a walk through the menu of what's available. So I would be happy to enter into a dialogue with you now and take all your questions and suggestions.
For your presentation, I found that it was very interesting, and it's not only I think a manual of how to produce creativity. It's also an ethical manual for how to engage with creative agents. It's very useful not only for creatives but also for politicians, for decision makers. So I found it very interesting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
My question for you is, this is a method to produce creativity and to produce creative industries working together, not only creative people, decision makers, politicians, etc. But if you want to create a creative industry that is sustainable and that you can live for it, you can work and gain your life with that. Is it possible to do it like this? Do you have any examples of collaboration like this, which created creative industries that can work for themselves later? I don't know if you understood my question.
Yeah, I understand your question. And I think my answer would be twofold, maybe. And first of all, one of the examples was the one from Jessica Smart. So she graduated as a conceptual designer, and thanks to her engagement with a number of these collision environments, if you want, she got access to resources and funding and knowledge that she would otherwise not have got access to. So this allowed her to transform from a conceptual designer into an entrepreneur. And she's now, I don't know the details of how far she is in making her own living, but she has now a business instead of a design studio. So that's one example. And with the organization I'm involved in called Creative Ring, in the 6 cities that we are active in, I think overall we were able to bring over 4 million euros of funding and resources to actors in the cultural and creative industries that otherwise they would maybe have overlooked. So I think that's a very direct example on how these type of activities can help to, I'll stop sharing the screen. Yeah, so this is one of the examples where, where you can really transform culture and creative industries into making a living. And then on the other level of my answer would be, how sustainable are these collision environments? And that's another question, because there you have a different challenge, and it's about the people organizing these environments and what are the business models and the revenue models behind that. So that's a different aspect, but I don't think that was your question, right? But also there are a number of examples on how you can sustainably turn this into reality, implement this.
My name is Lionel Alegre. I work for the University of Évora, and I think one of the big challenges, I'm coordinating a project for creative industries, cultural and creative industries in the region, and I think that one of the main challenges that we have is how to convince creative people to move to a small town like Évora and to choose Évora instead of Lisbon or any other center. So what can the city offer to these people to convince them to come here? So you mentioned this concept of frictionless cities as cities that promote creativity. I was also reading about other cities like Florida who had this policy of the 3 T's. So in order to be a creative city, they were talking about how can we attract talent, how can we attract technology or have the technology for these people to create their jobs, and also talking about tolerance as a very important characteristic of a creative city. So I think that Évora, we were discussing, this is my feeling, somehow conservative, close-minded, very, it's a small city. So my question is, what are the main characteristics that a city must have and that we must work on in order to attract these creative people to this city and to make it really competitive compared to other cities like Lisbon, which is just like 1.5 hours. But for instance, we don't have enough trains for people to move easily from Évora to Lisbon. So even the mobility is a problem here from my perspective. So what are the main characteristics that we have to work in a city like Évora, a small city like Évora, a peripheral city, in order to attract these people? I
think this is a very relevant question, and I see it all around me. And that being said, I hope you don't expect the full answer from me, because this, I think, is, first of all, it's not my immediate level of expertise, and also it would take another webinar, I think. But I see it all around me, and obviously, an easy answer, it depends on your context. So I've had the opportunity to visit Évora, so accidentally I know a little bit about the context, but it's, and there are experts on this, it's about public transport availability, local infrastructure, this kind of stuff. But my addition to this answer would be, it's about people. And that's something that I think is universal. Like, who do you want to attract? Maybe look at who do they want to meet? Can you, if you want to attract creative people, then what are the other people that they would like to meet? And can you create an environment for them in your city to become enthusiastic from each other? And that's a very, again, an easy answer. And I don't have an immediate advice now on how you should do that, because it could be through any of the elements that you have named. But I also live in Belgium in a small city, just 25,000 inhabitants, so it's very small. But also there you have this similar challenge. But still, if you open up for this community and you really show that you're there for them, as a small city, I feel that that's already one of your added values towards the others, where maybe they are more anonymous. And since you're smaller, you also don't need the big communities to come to Evora. So if you can start with a very motivated small group of people that you can nurture and foster, that would be my suggestion. Like start from there, and passionate people usually attract more passionate people. So that would be my answer for now. Hi.
So perhaps in just listening to this previous question and your answer, do you think there's a solution for attracting people that doesn't think the local cohesion first?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I think that for attracting people, you need to work your context too, right?
Yes.
It's an important factor on bringing others in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And also I thought about your examples that they were quite similar or close. And I think this is something that is going strong around Europe and in the world about placemaking, I think.
Yeah.
This idea that we can build the city together, and from then you can drive creativity and new ecosystems or reinforcing the existing ones.
Yes, you're correct.
How can we make it sustainable? How can we fund a process that in the beginning, like, you cannot see the result?
No,
how
that's
would you
true.
advocate for that in a region that doesn't seem where this is new?
Yeah, well, again, I don't know if I have the magic answer here, but from my own experience, I've seen a lot of the time that it can start with a very small group of, or with just one person in the right position in the right organization to kick things off and to create the first spark and be persistent, as I said. And when I look around me in certain cities where there's more, let's say, potential for this, it's obviously easier to find people that create these sparks, and then they find each other. And if the first spark doesn't kick off, then they create another one. In areas where there's less foundation to start from, I think the municipality can have a big role, or maybe a private foundation, or someone with philanthropic attitude that again there find one person that understands this, that is passionate about it, and I think it's about hospitality and about also being there for others, so understanding the other person's agenda, and if you can find a person or an organization that's passionate about that, and that is more about giving and bringing and building rather than taking, then hopefully you can create a context around this person to take away the friction of this person, and it doesn't always have to cost a lot of money and resources. It's just about taking away the biggest concerns and creating a context around this person or small group of people. So that I think should be your focus. And to give you an example, with a lot of the things that we have done in Eindhoven, and I've been involved in, also the Creative Ring initiative, which is by now an international initiative. It started with a lot of volunteers work. So just by people doing this, when they have 4 hours of free time and they believe in it, they're just doing it because they get energy from the collaboration with others. They get energy from seeing that they can help out other people. So it doesn't always have to cost a lot of money initially. But then hopefully once you move forward and you create your first successes, you're also capable of convincing people to step in, to help you in kind, also maybe with some funding. And there it would again be out of scope to go into all the hypothetical revenue models that are there, but I've experienced or have some experience with a number of those, going from fully volunteer work to fully paid. So I think the range is there, but it depends on your local context. Yeah, that's a good question. Indeed, I see. I'll briefly read it. So, in the municipality, and this is a question for Onda, but I think more or less a universal thing. And by the way, not only in municipalities, but also in other organizations, in industry, in corporate, there's a lot of reluctance towards failure and experimentation because you can only spend your money once, right? That's at least the philosophy. And then I think I go back to my introduction where I say, try to just do it without whatever means you have. And if it's 100 euros and it's 100 euros, and it's five hours a month and it's 5 hours a month, but just start doing it. And I know it's a very cheesy advice, but just start doing it. And also don't be afraid to discontinue things. Talking about events, in Eindhoven alone, I've been involved in already, I think, 6 or 7 series of events in the past 10 years where we try to bring people together on regular occasions. Sometimes it was quarterly, sometimes it was monthly, sometimes it was weekly. And none of these initiatives lasted for more than 1.5 years. And it doesn't matter. At some point, the energy or whatever gets out of these initiatives, or there's no reason to continue them or whatever. And it doesn't matter because then a few sometime later, someone else will start from these learnings, will do something new. So whatever you do, I think it's never goes to loss. And the biggest risk is try to evaluate it at short term. But yeah, indeed, it's an attitude. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. And it's just about taking the plunge and start small and maybe under the radar and just start doing it. That would be my only advice.
Okay, Koen.
Yes.
Can you listen to me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, I think it was a good session. Everybody as you see, we have a small audience, and we gathered our beneficiaries and some political deciders also here. And well, if nobody else from the other partners, virtually or locally, have any questions, I think we're done. Okay, well, thanks again for the opportunity, and yeah, I hope that our paths will cross in the future. Maybe I'm also very curious about your local passions and ambitions, so do not hesitate to reach out to me and share your stories with me. I'd be very happy to engage with you. So thanks a lot.
I don't know if you can listen to me.
Yes.
I just would like to thank you for the webinar and for your speak. We are now. We think it was really interesting, and we had been discussing before your intervention some situations that it was very interesting to see that some of the questions that we have been discussing here, you have approached them to on your speak. So now we will try to go over a little bit of the linguistic barrier, and we will keep on the discussion here in Evora at least. And I think it was really quite interesting, and now we have more clues to work on. And so it's just to thank you for your time and contribution. Thanks.
Okay,
And see you.
thanks a lot. And whenever any one of you is around in Belgium or Eindhoven, just give me a call and I'd be happy to host you, show you around, open doors if needed. So, so always welcome.
Okay, we will. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Koen.
Bye.